Hello, good morning, and welcome to the Dailies on Network Television, where we keep you updated with some of the happenings on the papers. We have quite a number we would love to look at, especially looking at the reverse of the policy. We will recall that the former Minister of Education have said that for you to get admission to a tertiary institution and also to write WAEC and JAM, you must be 18 years and above. But we're seeing that that policy has been reversed rather. So we see that even from 60 years and above, you are now qualified to write the tertiary examination. So these and many others are what we would love to look at this morning. So please do well to drop your comment, your views regarding any of the stories we will be looking at this morning. I am Sela Elisha. I will be doing this program together with Rachel Tanzi. Good morning.
Good morning, Sela.
All right, we shall run through the papers, starting with the Guardian newspaper. The big story here, cash and carry. Public engagements, debates fading as vote buying rules polls. You can read detail of that on page 6. 16-year-olds now eligible for tertiary education as federal government reverses age policy. You can read that on page 4. Sokoto local government chair alleges 1 million naira youth inducement for new terrorist group. And we have the talking about minors freed on humanitarian conditions, says federal government as NAPPS offers scholarships to those minors. You can read that on page 6. Deregulation not licensed to blend off speed products, says Dangote. Rising energy demand vandalism affecting Greek stability, says expert. FBI warns of disinformation as Trump gives condition to concede the poll. You can read that on page 2. And we have Chief Justice of Nigeria lament the rising vulnerability of Nigerian firms to cyber attacks. Downside, which happens to be the last story on the paper, federal government pledges to caution hardship boosts the MSMEs. You can read that on page 5 as well, and that's all on the Guardian newspaper.
On Nigerian Tribune, the first story, federal government moves to curtail negative net assets of 39 trillion naira. The writer says to enforce compliance, sanction erring MDAs, MOFI to register all federal government assets. Fear of post-election unrest in United States as tensions rise. You can find details on page 23. Hashtag end bad governance protest. Court strikes out treason charges against minors. IGP orders probe into their welfare in detention. Why Tinubu ordered their release. Statement from Vice President Shatima. Falana advises President to enroll them in schools. The big story on the paper, federal government reverses 18-year age limit for admission into tertiary institutions. Minister hints on review of national education policy, warns tertiary governing councils against floating extant rules. You can find details of his statement on page 4. LATMA officers set ablaze in Lagos. Oyebanji appoints Justice Okumoye as acting chief judge. I am satisfied with my achievement in 8 years, a statement from Obaseki. Tinubu promotes acting Chief of Army Staff Oluyede to Lieutenant General. You can find details on page 2 and also a picture showing the ceremony. The last story on the paper, why Tinubu's economic policies more workable than Atiku's, a statement from Omokri. You can find details on page 23, and that's all the news on Nigerian Tribune.
On leadership newspaper, 28 die in Niger, bandit attack, Imo accidents. You can read detail of that on page 4. Federal government reverses 18-year entry age for varsity. And we have concerning forex crisis, man advocates patronage of local products. That's talking about the Manufacturing Association of Nigeria have urged the federal government to encourage Nigerian-made products to reduce pressure on the foreign exchange market. So you can start reading that on the front page and do continue on page 7. Court dismisses treason charges against protesters. You can read that on page 7. Concerning U.S. election, the world waits with bated breath for polls result, where we're seeing Trump-Harris tied amid high voter turnout. About 82 million voters cast via mail, and then we see another writer saying how election rules in key states may delay the results. So you can do well to read more detail of that on page 4. 14.3 million people in Nigeria are drug users, coming from the federal government. 14.3 million people in Nigeria are drug users. I think this is what the federal government is saying. You can do well to see how they came up with the statistics of people on page 6. Court stops CBN and others from withholding Kano local government funds. National grid collapses the 9th time in 10 months. That happened yesterday at around 2. So you can do well to read more detail of what actually happened on page 25. Coming from INEC, we are fully prepared for Edo election. This is what the INEC is saying on page 6. You can read that. We have a cross-section of some of the August 1st protesters from Kano and Kaduna during their formal handover to respective governors at the presidential villa in Abuja. We can see them over there, and that's all on the leadership newspaper.
On the Daily Times, 7th NDIS, President Tinubu calls for global partnership to drive national development. Deregulation, not a license to blend off-spec products, jeopardize national interest, Dangote tells Pinnacle Oil. Niger Delta youths threaten to protest in Abuja, demand removal of NDDC MD. Federal government reverses 18-year admission age for tertiary institutions. National grid collapses again as TCN battles to restore power. The big story on the paper, Sokoto government raises alarm over infiltration of new terror group. And the name of the terror group is Lakurawas. You can find details on page 2. Sect currently operational in 5 local government areas. House of Representatives queries Health Ministry over 10 billion naira PPP program concession agreement. You can start with the details on the front page. LATMA officer set ablaze while discharging official duties. This happened in Lagos. You can find details on page 3. We have a picture, I think, in the celebration of the 7th NDIS, where we can see Shehu Aliyu, Rep First Bank Group, Senator Victor Ume, Chairman Senate Committee on Diaspora, Honorable Abike Dabri Erewa. We have Chairman CEO Nigerians in Diaspora Commission. We have Senator George Akume, Secretary to the Government of the Federation. We can also see Ambassador Bolaji Akinremi, Director of Economic Trade and Investment, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Honorable Satukochuku, and we have Chairman, House Committee on Diaspora Affairs during the 7th Nigerian Diaspora Investment Summit in Abuja. And that's all the news on the Daily Times newspaper.
All right, let's take a look at another paper, which is the Vanguard newspaper. Deregulation, not licensed to blend off-spec product, Dangote tells Pinnacle Oil. Again, National Grid collapses 4 times in 24 days. U.S. presidential poll, Harris-Trump upbeat about chances in key race. Why forfeited illicit armed post security threats coming from the NSA. The big story, hashtag #bad governance. Why we release minors coming from the federal government. Drops case against the 37 minors, 82 others as courts strike out the charge. Minors facing trial released on compassionate ground coming from Sheitima. Minors will be deintegrated coming from Governor Yusuf. Falana threatening to sue the federal government if minors are not given education. Released minors need mental health support. Released minors need mental health support coming from expert. And I think when we saw that case in the court, I think a number of people really frowned at the fact that these minors were going to be sent to prison. And we know this is where I think Nigerians will be in support of what Falana is saying, rather than, pushing them over there and they might mix up with some hardcore criminals. Why don't we see them being, sent to go study? Because when you are, educated about certain things, you are more, more like you're being liberated, and as much as you're more enlightened about what to do and what not to do. So I think this is where Nigerians are really going to support what Falana is saying, concerning the fact that, what, these minors need to be educated, because if they were busy in school and if they're enlightened about it, I don't think they would have gotten themselves involved in this. And I believe that they didn't go there on their own. They were sent by somebody. So why don't we go to the root cause rather than, you know, just trying to handle it from the surface? So we look forward to seeing what the government is going to do regarding this and hoping that they will be sent to school soon.
First of all, for these minors to be detained for that long is wrong. They are called minors for a reason. That is, they are still dependent, regardless of their situation, whether they're in or out of school, whether they do not have parents, whether they are marginals, whatever category they fall under, they are minors, and it means that they are dependent, and it means that their actions is solely as a responsibility of an adult involved. So when you get these people, the most is you interrogate them at their level. I'm not talking about a hardcore kind of interrogation, just the normal. Let them know who is behind them coming out, because they are also being given information. These are minors. So who is giving them the information concerning the government and what is making them to come out to protest, and who is giving them the idea behind what they were chanting, to the extent that you will say that their actions are treasonable and all of that. An idea is being sold to these minors, and then you are supposed to get the root of where it's coming from, and it's the people that instigated them to go out that you're supposed to go after. If you must detain them, is to get information from them from a very short while, and then you let them go. What would you be doing with a 14-year? We even have a correctional system that is not good, because these are juvenile cases, for example. We don't even have a system that can help these people. The fact that we already have a system that cannot help these minors, it already says that you cannot detain them, you cannot send them to jail, because you are not going to fix them. You're just going to make it difficult. Even if they were not what they were before, now you are turning them into what they were not before going into jail or something like that. So I just hope that it's not only about education. It's very, very important. I know it might take a while for the federal government to come up with something for them, because we know it always takes the Nigerian government a while to do anything important. However, it also opens our eyes to the fact that, you know what, our system, our judiciary system, our law enforcement system, our correctional system is faulty on a lot of levels, especially when it comes to dealing with underage citizens and minors precisely, so that we put in a structure for this kind of people. Because when you become a juvenile delinquency, I mean, you're supposed to, there are punishment at your own level, but except if we have a system that can punish them at their own level, if we don't have, then there is no point of trying to punish them whatsoever.
Of course, and no wonder experts here saying they need to go through some mental health support. So we look forward to seeing the government providing all of this. Still on the Vanguard newspaper, we have protesters storm National Assembly over hardship. You can read that on page 6. While telecoms infrastructure must be protected, coming from NCC and NJI. And of course, we have federal government reverses the 18-year admission benchmark in tertiary institutions. You can read that on page 9. Tinubu decorated the acting chief of army staff, Oloyede, with new rank. And then concerning Edo Guba, Ajayi, Flo Ayeda Tiwa in debate. This is coming from the PDP campaign council. Governor's performance excellent, coming from the APC. You can read that on page 35. And for sport, we have Super Falcons to tackle France, Les Bruce in friendly. You can read that on page 36. We have a picture story where we can see President Bola Tinubu and Chief Ayirimi Emima during the chief visit to the presidential villa yesterday. And that's all on Vanguard newspaper.
On Daily Independent, the big story, hashtag end bad governance protest, go and be responsible citizens. Tinubu tells 119 pardoned suspects. Urges Kaduna Kano government to anchor their rehabilitation and reintegration. Their release demonstrates Tinubu's compassion for masses. This is a statement from governors, and now it sounds very political. You can start with the details on the front page. PDP calls for total overhaul of EFCC Act, accuses agency of picking on key opposition leaders. Tinubu promotes acting chief of army staff to lieutenant general. You can find details on page 6. Hashtag end end bad governance, security institutions need strengthening on how to handle minors, just as we are saying, and the NBF is saying the same. You can find details on page 29. APC describes Atiku as most infamous election loser in Africa. Sanwo-Olu empowers 1,200 Lagos artisans with work tools after skill-enhancing program. National Grid suffers partial disturbance, a report from the TCN. You can find details on page 7, and I believe most places are being affected, even here on the plateau. Dangote to Pinnacle Oil. The regulation not licensed to blend off-spec products. You can find details on page 7. Education Minister reverses 18-year entry age for varsity admission. On oil spillage, cancer now common future in Bayelsa, says Diri. I mean, over time of consuming a lot of toxic waste and all of that, so it's not surprising if we are beginning to see this in Bayelsa. True. And rather than just having the information or the report out there, I hope that the governor does something about it. And we know that the oil producing states are not only the concern of the state governors, but the federal government and Nigeria entirely. So I just hope that the federal government wakes up and do something about this waste and what is happening in now Niger Delta regions, and then also these state governors should do something. And I think because medicine have grown, and for anybody that have been diagnosed and is treated, and to see that okay, the reason behind this cancer patient's case is due to the oil spillage, the toxic environment, for example. I think the government should be responsible for their treatment. I know it will be late, because in the first place, this environment should have been kept clean, that nobody should fall sick as a result of being the wealth provider or the revenue generating environment for the country. But if it have gotten to this point, I think the government should be responsible for treatment of such patients. It is not going to save, it's not a guarantee that the people's life there will be better, but at least the government can do something definitely about that. You can find details on page 6. Still, we have a picture where we can see our president promoting the acting chief of army staff. And that's all the news on Daily Independent.
Right, let's look at the metric newspaper. Deregulation, not a license to blend off-spec products. Dangote tell Pinnacle Oil. We've seen that in quite a number of papers. Do well to read that in the paper. Tinubu promotes Olufemi Oloyede, acting army chief, to the lieutenant general, which we saw in some of our papers as well. And then concerning court ruling, NNPP Board of Trustee has taken over party affairs, says Ani Bonam. You can read that in the paper, with the writer saying maintains Kwankwaso and others remain expelled, urges INEC to update its record, invite elected lawmakers to take ownership of their party. You can read that on page 3. Swing states too close to call as Trump, Harris rank up more wins. You can read that already. Very soon we'll get to hear who the winner is. So you can read that on page 3. Your tax reform bill dead on arrival in Dume bombs Tinubu, where the writer says, I am getting good support from my colleagues to throw out the bills. And then let people leave first before you start asking for taxes, coming from Ndume. It seems not to be quiet, even though he was, being, given a punishment not long ago, and then we're still seeing him being very outspoken regarding the tax reform. Another writer here says tax reform bills not North versus South issue, coming from the FRS official firing back in Dume for what he's saying. Of course, we saw governors and even the president saying that this is not an attack to the North, but then we know that the North is actually suffering because most of the states in the North are not actually, generating so much of tax. So definitely, they would really, really feel being attacked. So you can read more detail of that on page 2. Court dismisses case against 79 #embed governance protesters. You can read that on page 9. Ministers scrap 18-year age requirement for university admission. Nigeria suffers another power grid collapse plunges multiple states into darkness. You can read that on page 9. And of course, we have on entertainment. For those who always are watching Nollywood, you will know that Charles Okocha surprises his fans with a wedding announcement when others thought he was already married, but they were saying it was a surprise. So you can read that on page 22. We're still having the picture story towards securing Nigeria, where President Bola Tinubu is decorating the acting chief of army staff, Olufemi, with the new rank of Lieutenant General at the State House, Abuja, yesterday. And that's all on Metric newspaper.
On First News newspaper, Davido cast first ballot in U.S. election shares excitement. Federal government reverses 18-year admission benchmark in tertiary institutions. America votes Harris Trump's power as nation braces for poll results. I think our papers are a little bit backward concerning the election results in the U.S. as more information is out there who is leading and who has emerged as the winner so far. Still on First News, Kano governor handed 73 detained minors. Kaduna governor receives 39. National grid collapses again. Darkness envelopes Nigeria. The big story, Peter Obi is saying if she has an affair, it's her business. Nothing will make me leave my wife. Hashtag end bad governance protesters, minors released on humanitarian grounds. Statement from Vice President Shettima. Reps summon ministers over $2 billion renewable energy funding. Federal government to acquire helicopters for accident victim evacuation. This will be an absolute welcome idea. And I hope that it is soon and quick and fast, because I think it's important we start taking saving lives seriously in this country. And that's all the news on First News newspaper.
On Nigerian News Direct, National Grid experiences partial collapse as DCN assure of sweep repairs. You can see that on page 7. Hashtag end bad governance, Kano government assures integration of 73 released minors as court strike out treason charges. The writer saying Tinubu's decision to release protesters driven by compassion, coming from the Vice President Shettima. Ali Ndume calls for compensation for wrongfully arrested minors, not rehabilitation. So we're seeing he's having a different point of view regarding that. You read that on page 8. Lagos empowers 1,200 artisans with work tools in upskilling program. Education Minister reverses 18-year age limit for tertiary admission. UBA introduces SME card to deepen customer values, empowers entrepreneurs. You can read that on page 5. And that's all on Nigerian News Direct.
On Blueprint newspaper, will restore image deficit of humanitarian affairs. New Minister Nantawe is assuring Nigerians. Stagnant labor incomes drive 14 million more Nigerians into poverty, a report from World Bank. International friendly Super Falcons to face France November 30th. U.S. presidential poll is the big story. Trump outrage over faulty scanning ballot, sure of victory. And we have the writer saying ex-president Kamala Harris get neck to neck. Anxiety heightens over 270 electoral college votes. Election results trickle in Wednesday morning. Hashtag end bad governance, be good citizens. Tinubu admonishes freed 119 minors. Federal government hands over children to Kaduna and Kano governors. Educate them or face legal action, Falana wants. And I hope that he follows up to see that they get education or they face the legal actions eventually. You can start with the details on the front page and continue on page 9 and 8. FCCPC begins enforcement on discourse over charges. FMC Kefi issues 2-week ultimatum over. You can find continuation of the story inside the paper. Buhari visits Borno Jigawa over flood and tanker explosion. That's all the news on Blueprint newspaper.
On the Punch newspaper, eyes on swing state as Harris-Trump battle for U.S. presidency. So shortly we will give you the outcome of this election. Deregulation, not licensed to blend low-quality products coming from Dangote. Concerning Ondo governorship election, Kan meet Ayedatiwa declares 3-day prayers. And on debate, APC PDP bicker over candidates' performance. More data found on page 7. Nationwide blackout as Greek suffer 10th collapse in 2024. Generation drops to 0 megawatts, 22 gencos affected, nationwide partial power in the southwest. And we have over 300 billion naira loss in protest. Shetima asks release hungry miners. You can tell that. You can find that in the paper. I take that story again. Over 300 billion naira loss in protest. Shetima tells release hungry miners. You can see them, some of them looking excited and happy to be released. You can find that on page 2. Stakeholders hail reversal of 18 years policy for varsity admissions. Lagos driver flee after setting LASMA officer on fire. And we need to do something to protect them, even though some of the, indigents of Lagos are complaining about how LASMA, treat them. But we just hope that whoever is behind this will be brought to book and will face the full wrath of the law. As well, we still have concerning the Equatorial Guinea to install CCTV in offices, suspend officials. You can find that on page 7, and that's all on the Punch newspaper.
On New Telegraph, the big story, Nigeria plunged into darkness again as national grid collapses 4th time within a month. TCN blames incident on line trippings. FCCPC to sanction erring discourse for billing inaccuracies, inadequate customer care. You can find details on page 3 and 29. Service disruptions, CBN orders banks to get approval before upgrading system. And I totally agree with the Central Bank of Nigeria. A lot of funds were lost in between this period because people tried making transactions without knowing that there was a service upgrade going on. And when you are sending these messages, you use every means whatsoever. You send a text, you send emails, because it's not everybody that use their email. So to see the action, and even if, when did you send it and how quick was this notice that people could see? You put it on television, you put it on social media, even as adverts. You don't have to wait till somebody mistakenly opened their email to see this or hears it from another person, because it disrupts a lot of things for people, and so much money was lost. And I'm waiting to see if after all of this system upgrading, the funds that are still hanging somewhere will be returned by these banks. And I know a lot of people were affected, and I'm glad that the Central Bank of Nigeria is stepping into it. And it shows that these banks also went ahead to do something this intense and serious without getting a go-ahead from the Central Bank. Still on the paper, Chevron unveils plans to increase crude exploration in Nigeria. Citizens without insurance access to get federal government financial protection. Tinubu decorates acting Chief of Army Staff Oluyede with new rank. Local government autonomy, Governor Sule scraps joint account in compliance with Supreme Court judgment. On Ondo Guba, we are fully ready for election. INEC chairman is assuring the people of Ondo State. PDP demands total overhaul and reform of EFCC. This is concerning the Okoa case. We can find details on page 2. On LG poll, Abia LP blames electoral laws on party crisis. On corruption, Zimbabwe bans police from using mobile phones on duty. Hashtag End Bad Governance protest. Court terminates treason charges against protesters as federal government withdraws. Federal government reverses 18-year age limit for varsity admission to 16 years. Who identifies, okay, I believe is the World Health Organization, yes, who identifies 17 pathogens as top priorities for new vaccine development. You can find details of their development on page 5, and that's all the news on New Telegraph.
All right, let's take a look at Business Times newspaper, where we have 75 billion naira. MSME's loan scheme will diversify economy. You can find that on page 2. 33 million Nigerians to face food crisis in 2025. This is a report. So the question will be to the government, what are you doing to prevent this from happening? More detail found on page 5. The big story, FCCPC to discos make electricity affordable, accessible, and reliable. The rider tax discos on consumer involvement in electricity bans classification. You can find that on page 2, where we see certain rural areas are being put on ban A, and you wonder how would they be able to fund to pay that. So I think it's very important that consumers are involved in this classification. More data found on page 2. Assets tracking valuation, crucial for accountability, coming from the Accountant General of the Federation. LDC should leverage on carbon market to drive development, this is a report. Renewable energy essential for women-led agricultural growth, says WCCINA. Nigeria enforces tough penalty for telecom infrastructure crimes with new presidential order. And we have Bank of Industry urges MSMEs to embrace presidential loan scheme. The rider disburses 1 billion naira to 20,000 Ogun business owners, detailed on page 2. We have a picture story here where we can see the Lagos State Governor with graduates during the 12th graduation ceremony of the Lagos State Skill Acquisition Center organized by the Ministry of Wealth Creation and Employment on Tuesday, and that's all on the Business Times newspaper.
On Punch Sports Extra, Madrid sets sight on Lookman. Super Falcons to play France in friendly. Osimhen returns to training. Tough test awaits Gunners at San Siro, where we can see Arsenal going against Inter Milan. And then we have PSG versus Atletico. Parisians host Colconerians in first ever meeting. Fernandez on Barca, Inter Madrid radar. Ten Hag kicked against Chelsea signing, and Reds make decision on Jan Chelsea exit. And you can find details on page 5. Kane's poor exit left Berbatov crying. Joshua giving February the boys rematch ultimatum. Nigeria beat Cameroon to reach IHF final, that is hockey. You can find details on page 2. Djokovic pulls out of ATP finals. Catalans eye third successive UCL win. Red Star versus Barcelona. The big story, quick stop, a question. Sevilla may end Iheanacho's Spanish La Liga adventure. And that's all the news on Punch Sports Extra.
On Business Day newspaper, Frontier Exploration Fund faces scrutiny amid oil production struggles. You can start that on the front page and do continue on page 31. Deregulation not licensed for off-spec petrol importation, Dangote tell Pinnacle. And we have immigration tops Nigerians' concern as U.S. elect new president. Nigerians get 28% of U.S. job visa in 2023. And we have telco slow network investment to reduce FX losses. You can find that, of course, on page 30. And that's all on Business Day newspaper.
On the Nation newspaper, the first story, payment for meter replacement, federal government stops discourse. No to exploitation of consumers, FCCPC, NERC, and EMSA insist. 11 billion naira loans given to 90,000 students in 6 months. Omokri is saying why Atiku's economic revival pill is unworkable. You can find details of these stories on page 3 and 4. The big story, Trump leads Harris in U.S. poll, both camps hopeful. Discharged minors released to Kaduna Kano governors at Aso Villa. You can start with the story on the front page, and then we have a quote, use the opportunity of the president's magnanimous gesture in ensuring that you overcome and become responsible citizens who will contribute to the growth of the society. Deregulation not licensed to blend bad petrol, says Dangote. Another power grid collapse drops generation to 32 megawatts. Under 18 now free to seek varsity admission. Details can be found on page 3. EFCC accuses Ishaku of frustrating trial. That's all the news on the Nation newspaper.
Well, and that's how far we can go on the program this morning. Thank you to our viewers, our followers, and every other person who made the program a success. We look forward again to doing this together. Please do have a great day ahead.